Hi there. Welcome to the Sober Circle channel. Enjoy this speaker tape.
My name is Tom, and I am an alcoholic. And a drug addict. And a member of Al-Anon. And I always find it amazing to show up anywhere sober. I got into the conference Saturday afternoon, and I don't go to a lot of conferences because I get so nuts here. The first young people's conference I ever went to was in Monterey, California, and this was in 1976, and my sponsor dragged me along because it would be good for me. And I got sober when I was 29 years old, and I thought I was the youngest person in the history of the world that had to get sober. And when we got to the Monterey conference, there were 1,000 drunks there, and I realized the first night they had all of us in this big room, and the chair said, how many people are here tonight who are not yet of legal drinking age? And about 60 women and men stood up. And I had this horrifying realization that if the group had been divided in half, I would have been on the older half, you know. And I stayed terrified the entire weekend. What I became very grateful for were the marathon meetings, because what I would do is when I got real nuts, I would just go and sit there and hang out. And I'm real grateful for the small meetings here at the conference. I got here yesterday. By Saturday night, I was physically ill. I didn't know anybody. I've never been to Denver sober before. My idea of the United States is you have California, and then you have Nevada, then you have the East Coast. That's how I relate to most things. So when we learned geography, I was busy that year, I guess. But what I had to do, and I've learned this on the program, is bit by bit, when possible, start to make connections. Just start to walk up to someone and say hello. And I forced and I found that it started getting better. So by last night, I was attending a meeting, and it was just very comfortable to be there. It was safe to be there. I'm reminded, one of my favorite pictures is Harold and Maude, which is in many ways the story of my life, except I was Harold. But Maude is this remarkable 80-year-old woman who is filled with life, and Harold is a 20-year-old terrified, death-obsessed nerd. And Maude and he are at the boardwalk in Santa Cruz, and Harold is hanging back being self-obsessed, and he notices Maude over at the pinball machine talking to everybody. And afterwards, Harold pulls her aside and says, boy, you sure do get along well with people. And Maude said, well, I should. They're my species. And it just takes me time to remember that, you're my species, and it's okay. It really is. What's true? That I don't know all the time, but I thought what I'd like to do this morning, I don't have a great drunkalogue, I can tell you that right away. I am very impressed with people who do. And that gave me a problem when I first came in here, because yours was longer than mine, and I just was so overwhelmed by that. I never got a 502, that's, DWI or DUI, whatever you call them in your neck of the woods. But I drove drunk for years, but they never stopped me. I never spent a night in jail. I never was fired from a job. I never even got a tattoo, which shows you what a bad alcoholic I really am. When I didn't even know you could drink in the morning. I don't know how I got here. I was just dying. That's what I was doing. But I had been around the program for a while, and I came in. My first day without a drink is the day Gerald Ford, remember him, was nominated for President of the United States. That's somewhere in the middle of August of 1976. It was during the Republican convention, and when you're drinking, not at all, you're a little nervous, you watch TV a lot and go to the bathroom, and that's what I did. And I noticed Gerald Ford was President of the United States, and I turned to the fellow next to me and said, "What happened to Nixon?" You know? Like I say, I was real busy there for a couple of years and just missed a lot. So that kind of comes in. I'm the youngest of 3 children. Alcoholism is all over the family. We never talk about it. My father's Irish Catholic. My mother is Swedish Lutheran. You know, there's just a lot of those things. So if you connect on any of those points, that's fine. But all that stuff just bores me to tears. Maybe you find my story fascinating, but I find it awful. So I'd rather talk about being sober this morning. That's what I remember most of, you know. But not always, because from an alcoholic family, even before I started drinking, I discovered emotional blackouts, where I didn't have to drink to have blackouts. I could just not be there, and I've done that in sobriety too. I'm just, the body's there, you know, but you want to check in and find out where I am. You know, me showing up physically anywhere doesn't mean anything. Anyway, so I'd like to do something that has become very meaningful to me, and if to take a look on page 83 of the book, they have a series of things called the promises. Now, I am not anybody, I have not memorized the big book. I figure it's written down, you know. And so I always have to ask people where things are, because I just like, where's the fifth chapter? They say after the 4th. I say, thank you very much. I never remember that. But it says on the bottom of 83, it says this. It says, if we are painstaking, it's right at the immense step, talking about getting to the point where you're trying to repair a little of the damage. You're working out your karma, as we say in Berkeley, and, you know, and they say, if we are painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we are halfway through. I think that's the first promise. I really think it is. Because when I got here, I wasn't amazed at anything. I was burned out and cynical and angry, and it had been years since I had been impressed by any woman or man or any event. And I was around for a little while, and I think I noticed something like the sunset, you know, and I turned to someone and said, has that been going on, you know, for a long time? And they pointed out that it had, and I began to find out that one of the first gifts that I got on this program is the ability to be amazed again, to be amazed and to wonder and to be curious and to be interested in anything other than my own mind. You know, all 7 of them. People on the program would talk about the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde personality. If it was only Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, I would have been pretty much at ease with it, but I also had a bad case of Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs. You know? They just came out. It says then, we are going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. I didn't care. I really didn't. I wasn't interested in freedom or happiness. I just didn't want to have to drink again, you know. It says we will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. Ha! You know that's wrong. We will comprehend the word serenity and we will know peace. Now, to me, that sounded like a Hallmark card. See, when I got in here in August of 76, I had peace and serenity. To me, those things sound like banners in church, you know, nice spelt things that are pretty, but they have nothing to do with my life. I was not interested in it. I just didn't want to drink again, you know. Very simple. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. I was willing to grant that point. But I, first of all, never thought that anyone would be interested. And second, I just didn't, what should I talk about? I was not real sure on what was true and what wasn't, and experience and benefit, who knows. It then says, that feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. I was horrified. You see, what I did best when I got here was feel useless and have self-pity. I loved it. I still do. I can find whole weekends get filled up with uselessness and self-pity. And when they told me this would disappear, I can visualize the room I heard that in. I felt awful because that's all I had, and the image I had, I think in pictures, was that all of this uselessness and self-pity would be pumped out of me, and there literally would be nothing left. I would just be an empty shell, and I could just be a hollow, thing wandering around, no selfishness and self-pity. It says, we will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows, plus self-seeking will slip away. Well, I thought that I should have been doing those already, so those two things just made me feel guilty. I'm late, is what I figured on those. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Terrified me. I didn't want anything to change. I just didn't want to drink again, and I was just going to hold on to that for as long as I could, because I was just fine, thanks, except I had this little problem with alcohol on a regular basis, and I fought for my attitudes, I earned them. It then says, fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. Now, I've been to meetings where it's read this way, fear of people will leave us, and so will economic insecurity. Different. This says the fear of economic insecurity will leave. I've been around enough, and it's funny how, let me not get political, but there's a kind of thing where some people figure that if they really did a good fourth and fifth step, they should be pulling down $100,000 by the end of the year. And if you haven't, it's because God's still angry and you better do another one, That's nuts. One of the reasons I love this program is because Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob never got rich off it. After Bill Wilson got sober, he never held down a steady job. I love that. And it embarrassed him. This was a real source of embarrassment and shame to him on people he sponsored were making billions, and he was still asking, for handouts. Dr. Bob was a proctologist who shook a lot. You get an interesting clientele. I've been sober almost 9 years, and I still bounce checks. And the reason for that is because when they taught me subtraction, I was busy. And now what I do, when I bounce a check, I call the bank and we talk about it. I promptly admit it. I no longer change banks. It's real different. It's real different. But the fear of economic insecurity, it'll all work out. Now, I love that phrase, and that, to me, I do not, wealth and riches and, money, property, and prestige are not a promise of this program. Seeking money, property, and prestige got many of us to this program. That's an important thing to remember. And we're in God's hands, and things get worked out in God's time. And Blanche is a wonderful Al-Anon speaker from Texas, and I heard her speak, and she said something that just burned right into my heart. She talked about the time that her mother was dying of a terminal disease. I think it was in Florida. And Blanche went to visit her, and she didn't have long to go, and Blanche was standing in the hall, and Blanche was just in grief. She was sobbing, and this other woman who was in the hospital and also very ill came over and said, "Honey, your mother will be all right." And Blanche said, "You don't understand. My mother is dying." And this other woman said, "I didn't say she'd get well. I said she's going to be all right." And a lot of things don't work out my way, but it's really all right. You know, I mean, I had to come to the conclusion that more often than not, God knew what God was doing. Which put God way out of my league, you know. Because, like I say, I just show up and sometimes I'm not even there. It then says we will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. Now, this is the second promise that started coming true for me. Intuitively knowing how to handle situations that used to baffle me. What had occurred to me before, when I was drinking a little socially, if I attended any event, I knew I couldn't leave until it was over. Because I knew that as soon as I leave, someone wonderful would show up. Or something exciting would happen, you know. And so I always hung on and got drunker and more weird as the evening went on. It occurred to me as an intuitive insight, if I'm uncomfortable, I can go. I was stunned. The second intuitive insight that I had, and this was about 3 years sober, no, maybe a little earlier than that, who knows, it's all a blur, was this, and if it helps you, please feel free to use it. If it's after 11 o'clock at night, and it seems like a good idea, it's not. I learned that at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. The last promise is this. It says, we will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. And that is the first promise that came true for me. I have a funny kind of relationship with God. I mean, who doesn't? I think we all trudge our own path, and we're all on our own journey. I surely believe that. My journey was that I'm from a religious background. My parents, if you told my parents that they were pious people, they'd be embarrassed by that. But we were a church-going family. We followed the rules, and the understanding in my family was that if you followed all the rules, you'd be a wonderful person. We know that's not true, but they really believed that. And I followed a tremendous number of rules. I mean, I was a very good little boy. And my problem with God, though, started when I was somewhere around, 10 or 11 or 12 years old. And right around that time, I discovered masturbation. And quickly by myself. And some people have older brothers to show them things like that, but we never talked about that stuff, so we just... Anyway, I got quickly addicted, and shortly thereafter, at the school I attended, they explained to me all the evils of sex, and that masturbation on a moral equivalency level was equal to dropping the bomb on Hiroshima. That this was an awful thing to do, and that if you did this just once, you ruined God's whole day. This was very clearly spelled out. Now, this was in the late 1950s, who knows, and there surely wasn't anyone who went around talking about this kind of stuff, you know. So I knew several things at 10 or 11 or 12. One of them was that I was doing something that was awful. The second thing, I knew I was the only early adolescent male on the North American continent who was doing this. I also knew that. And I knew that I couldn't stop it. So I begged God to remove this obsession. And God didn't. And I reached a conclusion at 10 or 11 or 12 that God works for everybody but me. Now again, I've always believed in God, and I want to. So you've heard. I was raised Catholic, still am Catholic. I was never taught that God was awful, or judgmental, or vicious. Maybe I was busy, for that course. The God I believed in was a loving, wonderful, creative, high energy, all-encompassing, equal opportunity loving God who was intimately involved with every other woman and man on this planet but me. Okay, so that's how I went through adolescence. When I was 18 years old, I went into the seminary and I learned a lot about God. By the time I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, I had been in the seminary for a long time. I was scheduled to be ordained a Catholic priest the next fall. I knew an awful lot about God in German and in Spanish and in English and in Latin and in Greek and in Swedish. I read documents that go back 5,000 years. I knew the history. I knew the traditions. And it had nothing to do with my life. Because where my real life was, God couldn't touch for some reason. And that is an special kind of loneliness. During that time, there were some years when I didn't speak to God, but that's just because I was very disappointed. It's not because I didn't think God wasn't there. I just thought God was there. Anyway, coming into the program, I get into here, and people started talking to me about if you're going to stay sober, you're ahead of me. You gotta believe in God, and God will do the whole thing. And I did not tell anybody my secret for a long time. And I'm very grateful that in the second step of this program, what it says is we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Because that was my opening. What I needed was a power greater than myself. So I put God and the Pope and all those other folks way back on the shelf, and I could figure them out a lot later, thank you. I needed to find a higher power, and I went searching. Now, where I got sober was in the People's Republic of Berkeley. That's where I got sober. And therefore, as far as I'm concerned, that's where we have real AA, I don't know what the rest of you folks have. I was sober a couple of years, and a classmate of mine was being ordained a priest in Mexico, and I went down to Chihuahua backwater and off the main road, or 100 yards down this way and turned left. They had a little tiny AA clubhouse, and I went to it, and my friends would go to it, they would go, and I was the tallest person at the meeting, and they hadn't had an Anglo there in a long time, and so they wanted, and they were bored with each other's stories. So they wanted to play 20 questions. What is AA like in North America? So speaking with the Berkeley experience, I spoke for all of you. I want you to know that, and told him what the program was like in North America. And I was really eloquent and brilliant and insightful, and chatted on for a while. And after I was going for a few moments, this old man, in real slow, clear Spanish, so I could understand, said, "Do you people use the same 12 steps?" Now, I glanced up at the wall. They had, Guillermo W. and Dr. Bob on the wall, and they had Los 12 Pasos, and I read Los 12 Pasos down the line, and I said, "Don't do the same 12 steps." And he looked at me and said, "Then you'll probably stay sober." this God thing, I went looking in Berkeley, and I found a higher power. It was a meeting we called Berkeley Wednesday night. More accurate people called it the open ward, but it was a meeting where really everybody was present. You had real old people and real young people and married people and single people and people having relationships. You had Catholics and ex-Catholics and atheists and ex-atheists and Marxists and Hare Krishnas and Muslims and Hindus. When the Hare Krishna woman joined us, she kind of stretched the consciousness of the group a little. There was one fellow there who told her she'd stay sober if she'd stay out of airports. And we told him that we did not see that in the book. He had a problem, she was fine, you know. Make those distinctions clearly. We had straight people and gay people. At one meeting, we counted up 14 different sexual persuasions in the room. Now, and it was not a big night, you know. That was some of our more interesting people were doing something. But what was important about that meeting for me was that as far as I could see, the whole human race was present there. The whole human race. And if they could be present there, I could be present there. And when I walked in the room, I felt the love and the acceptance. And I used that as my higher power. And I went to a lot of other meetings. I don't know if I did the 90 meetings, and I mean, who knows? But I know that if it was Friday and life got awful, I knew all I had to do was get through to Wednesday night when I could walk through the doors of that room and be loved. And I didn't know about coffee afterwards. So that scared me. What do you say at coffee afterwards? What do? You know, what do you talk about? I didn't know how to do that for 3 years. You know, it seems so simple, Tom. It might seem to you, but it's overwhelming to me. So I would stay at the meetings, and I became involved in stuff. Anyway, that room becomes the focus for me for what I would call spiritual awakenings in my life, and back to God. My first spiritual awakening on this program took place in that Berkeley Wednesday night meeting, and one night at 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 months sober, I looked around the room and noticed that I was not the only person in the room. That might not seem like a major insight to you, but to me, because I've always been unique and isolated and alone. And what occurred to me was every woman and man had a right to be in that room. I was a man in that room. I had a right to be there too. My form of arrogance is the form that it's this form. If you really get to know me, you'll be so embarrassed you'll ask one of us to leave. I just always believed that. And that's because I accepted as true the 5 rules of the world. And our society runs on 5 ironclad rules that are bone crushers. And rule number 1 is you can't have anything wrong with you. That's how it starts. Look good. Fit in. Wear the right styles. Don't do that. Haircuts are important. Get your teeth straightened. Don't have bizarre opinions. You're too fat. You're too thin. Don't be seen with her. She's weird. She's bizarre. People will talk. You can't have anything wrong with you. Rule 2. If you have something wrong with you, get over it fast. We'll give a lot of slack, you know, like a weekend, you know. This is oftentimes especially true with sponsors and sponsees. You say, I'm still so depressed, she left me, and your sponsor, it's been 2 weeks already, get over it, you know. I mean, thank you, I will take my own time to mourn, you know. God, I'm not on your... Anyway, that's editorial opinion. Rule 3. If you can't get over it fast, pretend you did. So, it goes like this. You're 5 years sober, you're suicidal. But you can't be suicidal because you're 5 years sober. So someone says, how are you doing, Tom? And you say, just fine, thanks. I can't tell my sponsors I'm having a bad day, they'll lose faith in the program. No, they won't. They'll realize how much you need it. You see. That's right. It's a difference. All right. If you can't have it, pretend. Rule 4. If you won't pretend, get out. And some of us do that. I think, 4% of us live on Skid Row? And Skid Row, I have always felt at home there. I really have. I did a little, after a few social drinks, on occasion I'd wander down to the Tenderloin in San Francisco and visit people, and wait to get mugged. No one ever mugged me, They moved away from me because I had that wonderful happy look in my eye, Anyway, Rule 5 applies to the rest of us, especially myself, and it's this: if you won't get out, at least have the decency to look ashamed when you're around the rest of us. So you come off with lines like, hello, my name is Tom, and I'm so sorry. I know I should be working a better program, and my 4th step wasn't complete enough. And my sponsor says, go to another one, and I need a haircut, and the job is that, da-da-da-da-da. You're never good enough. You're never good enough. All right. To get well, those 5 rules have to be broken on a regular basis. Because to get in here, you've got to have something wrong with you. And if you don't have something seriously wrong with you, we're not interested. So that little spiritual awakening for me, that I was not the only person in the room, that other women and men in that room had equal rights, was a sensational thing. Now, let me talk about spiritual awakenings for a moment, because from my denomination, a lot of churches in my denomination have lots of statues, and I used to go into these churches and sit in the back, of course, and look at one of the statues and say things like, if there really is a God, wave back. Well, sometimes they would, And then I'd say, do it again. Someone at the meeting I attended last night talked about making reality checks on things, and I really wish I was thinking, did you see that too? So frequently they did. It was so strange. That is not a spiritual experience. That is a hallucination. And it takes a while to sort that stuff out. It really does. And it's part of where I travel a lot, and some of the places I go to, they come up with things like, well, the first year sober is your physical taking care of things, and your second year sober is emotional, your third year spiritual. Well, that may be true if you are real fast. I'm a slow learner. And I'm also someone who I love speed. I feel so alive and there. What I've had to learn to get well is slow is real. Slow is real for me. And I think the first 5 years of sobriety are real early years of sobriety. But I'm 2 years sober, I said, I'm thinking, God, relax. Relax. When can I start reading the Bible? When you're around 5 years sober and you have a good sponsor. That's, again, my opinion, but I'm right. in my line of work, I mean, I talk with folks who drop acid and read the book of Revelation, you know, and they just saw Jesus walking down Hollywood Boulevard, and they want me to do something about it, you know. Like, say hello next time, you know. Now, in that Berkeley Wednesday night room, another spiritual awakening that I came to the realization there at 6, 7, 8, 9 months sober that there were two distinct points of view about Tom. This is an awakening, you know, it's coming to, right? One of them was mine, and mine was that I was an embarrassment. I was no good. I could have been real good if I just tried harder. Inadequate, capital I. The other point of view was from the women and men in the fellowship who seemed genuinely happy to see me walk through the door any given Wednesday night sober. They would hug me, they would say hello, they would ask me out for coffee. Of course, I wouldn't go. So it became clear to me that they thought I was okay. In fact, some of them even liked me. In fact, some even said they loved me. Terrifying. What does that mean, you know? So my moment of awakening there, and this is number 2 or 3 down the line, was I came to the realization that one of us was wrong. Now, which one? We all figure this out, right? Well, the moment of clarity that I had was this is not a matter of figuring anything out. This is a matter of faith. This is a matter of belief. And before I could in any way come to believe in a God involved in my life, I had to come to believe in a me involved in my life. See, I think it works like this, and again, it's an opinion which I could change tomorrow, but I think that I am God's first gift to me. And if I am bitterly disappointed in me, I'm going to have a little difficulty with the giver. You know? The second gift to me is you. And therefore, when I have the grace to fall in love a lot, I know that it's... And the third gift to me is God. And I find a lot of the difficulty I had in dealing with God was because I had tremendous difficulty in dealing with me and with you. But the first act of faith I made as a sober adult was an act of faith in your opinion of me, that you thought I was worthwhile. And therefore, I chose to believe that. Couldn't prove it, because every time I ran it through my committee, the vote was 7-4. I've only heard Bobby Earl speak once live. I was there. And, but I was 2 years sober, and laughter didn't come easy. I mean, my first year of sobriety was not a lot of laughs. But what I appreciated him for was he caused me to laugh. And the line that it was in Hollywood, that was on Wilshire Boulevard, Sunday night meeting on Wilshire in Normandy, and he said that he no longer wondered why people shoot themselves in the head. Just to shut up the committee, you know. Yeah, you know, absolutely. So, anyway, with that act of faith, I then came to believe, you know, what is it? This is 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 months sober. My last big spiritual insight of that time was this. I hadn't had a drink or a joint or a pill in 7 or 8 or 9 months. And I didn't do it. And therefore, it became clear to me, I came to believe, not feel, feelings different, feelings come and go, but I came to believe that God was involved in my life. Because the obsession to drink and use was removed. And I then started having to negotiate with God a little bit. Because I didn't understand how this worked, and it took me a long time. I went into therapy. By the way, the book says we can. I mean, I don't know. You don't believe me, I know, but it really does. On page 133, it says, God has abundantly supplied this world with fine doctors, psychologists, and practitioners of various kinds. Do not hesitate to take your health problems to such people. It's right here on. Okay. Yes! I had him, and I went. And my problem, I didn't come into Alcoholics Anonymous in excruciating pain. I came into Alcoholics Anonymous numb from my head to my toes, and as deep as I could go inside of me, numb. And, you know, you come to your first meetings and you kind of figure it out. One of the major themes of my drinking years is depression. Loved it. You know, I thought if you weren't depressed, you weren't paying attention. But when I stopped putting depressants in my body, that started ending. And so, right around 3 months sober, I was no longer numb. And it's right around the time they stopped saying hello to you, too. I went into rage and pain. And the best way I have of understanding that is this. The place I was locked up with this little drinking problem was next door to the burn unit. And if you've ever been through a burn unit, a burn is the most severe shock the body can get. And people who have been badly burned may leak a lot and may die, but they don't feel a lot of pain for a while. And the reason for that is all the nerve endings have been burned off. They don't feel any pain at all until they start getting well, because then the nerve endings start coming back. And suddenly they don't go into mild discomfort. They go into agony. And you find people working on the burn unit, the women and men that work there will go around to these people who are in agony and who will be in agony for a long time. They'll say, this means you're getting better. This means you're getting well. It'll never be this bad again. You can walk through this a day at a time. Now, I needed to know that, because I thought as soon as I stopped drinking, my life should get sensational, and it didn't. It didn't. And so I started, and at one point, the man I saw him twice a week, and his name was Leonard, and finally, after I got to trust him, finally said, Leonard, the one question I've always asked people, because I've been so terrified of it, I wanted to know, I did this in high school, but I found out if you ask this question to a lot of people, they get nervous around you, so I stopped asking, but I always wondered, and the question is, am I normal? Like I'd meet people at Santa Cruz, we'd have a little red mountain wine, and I'd say, do you think I'm normal? I was seeing Leonard now for a couple of months, and I finally said, Leonard, do you think I'm normal? And he turned to me with wise eyes and said, normal is 98.6. That's all it means. Now, it took me a long time to believe him, But I find out this is really true. See, I think normal, 98.6, the other meaning of normal is the neighborhood you live in. That's normal, see. Now, and there's shocks when you find out that's not true. Where I live, like at Berkeley and Oakland, in November of 1984, we voted 83% Mondale Ferraro. We thought that was normal. Until you visited the rest of the United States, we were in shock. I was like, do you know anyone who voted for them? No. How'd they win? We didn't know. It wasn't normal to us. So, like I say, normal depends on where you live, and I'm very aware of that. He said, you're asking the wrong question. I said, what question should I ask? How can I please you? What you need to do is ask, are you healthy? I said, what do you, and he said, well, a healthy person can do three things. A healthy person can work, and a healthy person can love, and a healthy person can play. That's how you spot them. And I said, could you tell me a little more about this? And he said, well, what your alcoholism did was it destroyed your ability to work. He said, you couldn't leave your room. I said, I could too. He said, I'm talking about 2 days in a row. Well, if you want to get picky. As far as, and I was a teacher at that time, and so they have these unrealistic expectations that you'll show up when the kids do. It's just very strange. And show up prepared, which is even more absurd, you know. What do you mean? I've been busy. So, as far as love, he said, in order to love, you got to trust. And he says, Tom, is there anybody you trust? I said, sure, there's lots of people. He said, name one. I said, there's George. And he said, where does George live? And I said, oh, George lives in New York. He says, when was the last time you saw him? I said, 10 years ago. He said, interesting, 3,000 miles in 10 years, you can trust. He said, anybody on the West Coast in the last decade? No. Okay. Play. Excuse me? The one moral value that we were and this is, I think this is true. I don't feel guilty about much. I really don't. Except not working. To me, the work ethic is a cellular reality. And if anyone else hear that? and when I'm not working, I'm a bad person. When I'm not working, I'm a bad person. And so it's learning how to play for me, to take time off, and if I need to take some days off, and if on your day off you sleep, that doesn't count as play. That counts as survival. Play is different. Watching TV does not count as play. That's Valium, you know? Doing something recreational, recreational drugs, right? Well, if you look at the word recreational, it means to create again, recreate. And play is doing something that recreates me. And I've had to look, how do you find out what for some people that's bowling. For some people that's wood carving. For some people that's cooking. For some people that's working in a garden. For some people that's backpacking. For some people that's going into a museum and wandering around. And I said, Leonard, how do I know which one of those works for me? And he says, you have to try them. And he said, try them about 3 times. Because the first 2 times you'll hate it because you're not doing it right. Learning how to play. It's still real hard for me. As far as love goes, well, what's true about that? What I learned in this, Marty's here. Marty and I were sober together. There was a meeting in Los Angeles called the Hollywood Thursday Night Men's Stag, which was the most serious AA meeting I've ever been to in my life. This was a problem-solving meeting. How arrogant, huh? Bring your problems, we'll solve them, we're men. We'd read from chapter 5, and if you had a difficulty, you were to share it, and if someone had a similar difficulty sober and got through it sober, they talked about how they did it. That was the format of the meeting. What was the point of that? I know there was one, but it's... Look! We'd have... Thank you, you're listening, I like that. I'm not, as you can tell. We'd have guys come in sweaty and pale and shaky, and they'd sit down and they'd say, I'm in love. And we'd say, you're in heat. And our advice to them was, lie down and don't sign anything. This too shall pass. And what was important there, because I could remember going to meetings, I just pray, so someone please just grab me and take me home, those kinds of evenings. And it's never happened. I don't know, it's an aftershave, I guess. Anyway, what I had to learn was you have all kinds of hormonal things and all kinds of emotional things, and any of them may or may not have anything to do with love. But love is real different, because love is not feelings. Love is action. And to make a decision to be a man who loves means I make a decision to act in a certain way towards another person or groups of people, even if I don't feel like it. How do you want to act? Act fairly, patiently, kindly, gently, without manipulation, in a giving way, in a way that builds bonds and trusts, which sounds very Al-Anon to me. And in my understanding, I see God as being the perfect Al-Anon. God will not tow you. If you want to get real weird, go right ahead. Why didn't God stop me? God's busy. But I think a lot of us were raised with the idea of God as rescuer, and we were probably taught that by an untreated Al-Anon, I think that's true. I find when people teach a fearful, angry God, if you look real close, you'll find they are fearful, angry people. God reflects them, God's having a wonderful time. We're invited along for the show if we're, not too busy. As far as work goes, what I found out is I could show up for a job I don't like on time. I could put in an average day's work and leave on time and not die. Amazing. And for me, see, health, the Latin word for health, and believe me, I know, is sanos. And from that we get sanity. And when we're talking about sane, we're not talking about having normal thoughts. There's no such thing as normal thoughts. Sane has nothing to do with those, sanity refers to your emotional and psychological ability to work, love, and play. That's what... See, I was afraid when that stuff said return to sanity, I know it's saying sane people are boring and they watch Lawrence Welk and think it's a little risque. I have no interest in that kind of sanity. The attracted people are crazy, they've lost their mind. I think that's missing the point. I think crazy people only have their minds left. It's the committee in permanent session. And what I think, and that's why I say I was nuts when I came in here, because the only thing going was the tape when I got in here. And what I had to do to get well is relearn how to feel and touch and grow and believe and have a sense of myself and my own intuition and my own life. That's being alive. And I didn't know that. I thought being alive meant looking good, or fitting in, or being a conformist, or insane. I was sober a year, and I wanted, what should I do with my life now? I had been in the order forever. I entered when I was 18. I was now 30 years old. That's forever. And I said, what do I want to be when I grow up? And I didn't know. And I found out that is the great adult secret. No one knows what they want to be when they grow up. We just don't tell anyone about it. So I had to figure out, what's God's will for me? Well, I have a couple of, clues. I think, remember, God's will is frequently possible. If it's impossible, you don't have to do it. Okay, now for me that was a blinding revelation. Number two, God's will is frequently reasonable. Well, there's all this famine in Africa. Should I go to Ethiopia and help feed people? Number one, Tom, how's your Ethiopian? A little weak. Well, why don't you stay here and do what you can do here instead of running off and doing what you know nothing about there? Okay, that's reasonable. That's probably God's will. Well, now, do I want to be a doctor or a lawyer? See? Or do I want to move in with Sally or Fred? I mean, how do I know what's right? See, well, let me figure it all out. So we figure it all out in your room alone, of course. And then you try it and you say, oh my God, I've made a mistake. What should I do? You promptly admit it. And then go do something else. Being sober is not a guarantee of infallibility to any woman or man. As sober women and men, we have the perfect right to make huge, glaring, public, embarrassing mistakes and take them home to our home groups and present it as a topic for discussion. Now, I go to a lot of meetings. What did I do? Let me finish the story there. I figured, being I was in the order already, and I liked a lot of the people I lived with, and I may as well try it. It can only be a terrible mistake. And so, on April 1st of 1978, I was ordained a Catholic priest in San Francisco, and I still function as one, which surprises me sometimes as much as it surprises them. And I find what I get to do a lot in my ministry is hang out with drunks and junkies and ne'er-do-wells and all the people my mother warned me about for years. It's wonderful, and I figured this is where I'm supposed to be because it feels good in my stomach. That's what I do. And who knows about 15 years from now? I don't worry about 15 years from now unless I'm real nuts. Then I worry about it. Today's fine. So that was my third step. I figured I'll go ahead with this. I'll turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understand God, and God changes all the time. And it'll be just fine. It'll be just fine. With all of that background, it's important for you to know that whenever I get into a crisis, I go blank. And the worst day I've had in a long time happened a few months ago. I was on my way to a meeting at the Berkeley Fellowship, so I was doing a good deed. And I rear-ended a woman who had just been fired from her job. Her first words to me were, "You better have insurance." Which I did because I figured that's God's will. You have insurance. Okay. And so we exchanged, all the things you're supposed to exchange, but I just blank out. What do you do when you cry? Well, there's a woman in Los Angeles named Patty F., and she says that she was driving on the Santa Monica Freeway on one occasion and got a flat tire and thought of killing herself. And it occurred to her that probably most Earth people do not think of suicide as the first option when they have a flat tire. So she had to work this one through. How can I get it some more options? Because you're not always with a group in a crisis sometimes. So she said what she found out was she could say, what would a normal person do in a circumstance like this? Then she paused and said, what would Nancy Reagan do in a circumstance like this? And she said, Nancy would call AAA. So, there I am, you're in this car, my car's dying. It is, her car's fine, my car's dying. The thought that ran through the things you hear at meetings, what would Nancy Reagan do in a circumstance like this? She'd call AAA. Call AAA, they came, got my car, and took it to Charlie's garage, we're very good friends. The tow truck guy dropped me off at the Berkeley Fellowship. I came in looking awful, to me. And I came around time for the plate, to throw in your buck, and I found out my wallet was gone. Now, in that, there wasn't a lot of money, but, my identity's there, the driver's license, the credit card, all these other crucial things, the membership card to my gym, crucial things. Don't use it, So I walked home, down Telegraph Avenue and found a letter waiting for me. It was a 2-page, single-space type hate letter written to me from Southern California that went way out of its way to indicate that there was a lot to be desired in me. Copy sent to my boss. Love it. Well, by 5 o'clock that night, I was sitting in front of the TV eating ice cream out of the carton watching Sesame Street. I said, this is a man 8 years sober, I did not know what else to do. And someone called me, and we talked, and they suggested that I might want to cancel the credit card. I said, good idea. then I thought for the next couple of days I was jerky, you know. I mean, but you go to the Department of Motor Vehicles, and you know, and you do the things that normal people do. See, what sobriety means for me is that I get to join the human race. It is actually a joy for me when I'm in touch to stand in line at Safeway, because it's what people do, you know. And when I'm in line at Safeway, I say, this is what grown-ups do, you know. They do this. It's wonderful. Instead of, listen, get out of here fast, you make an exception for me, I'm different. As part of that, what I've done, I was in therapy for about 2 years in my early sobriety. I went back into therapy at 7-year sobriety. And the reason for that was because I hit a bottom. And I think you do that sober. You hit bottom. You kind of burn out. And I was finding out that I was working real hard and getting nothing done. My left arm had been numb for 2 weeks, and I had chest pains. The body doesn't lie. It's telling me something if I'm willing to listen to it. And I said, maybe this has to do with stress. Call the doctor. Go see the doctor. And it's been very helpful for me. And coming back to be an adult, a member of my community, I found out for the first couple of years sober, I lived in AA. You were my support group. You were the women and men I loved. But I also find for my program, I need to be involved in my community too. So I do secretary a meeting. I do phone service every so often. But right now I'm secretary a meeting in AA. But also in my community, what I decided to do last February was get involved with the AIDS Project. Because to my understanding, the alcoholic used to be society's lepers, and right now we have a whole new group of lepers out there, and no one's saying hello. And as a man who is reasonably in contact with a higher power, I'm going to do what I can to be of service to a sister or brother who has this disease. And I find out that the women and men involved in this work in the East Bay, where I live, are some of the most profoundly spiritual people I've ever met. A couple of them in Al-Anon, a couple of them in AA, others are just good earth folks who are in touch with a higher power, and I learn a lot from them. And I learn a lot about, when I was a young man, let me tell you, when I was a young man, I came in here terrified and rigid. I was a racist. I had no use for anyone that didn't look like me. I was a sexist. I really believed that women shouldn't have the vote. I was homophobic. I shoot them. I wanted nothing to do with anything that wasn't, from a nice Eisenhower Republican family. That was the only thing I thought made sense. And what I find my higher power has done over the last years is broken down those walls. And so even with my client is a man who is dying and is very, very sick right now, and I find what I can do is be with him for a couple of hours a week and give him a massage. No one wants to touch him, see? And it's important for, I don't know what he's getting out of it, but what I'm getting out of it is that I'm no longer afraid of dying. And when I'm no longer afraid of dying, it means I can be very present here today. Now, I'm still afraid of getting sick, so there's more work to be done. But some of the basic fears that held me together are being taken away, and I see that as a real product of liberation. Let me end with a story that I heard a couple of years ago. I took a class in Jewish theology from the Orthodox rabbi of Berkeley. I figure anything I learn about being Jewish, I'm learning about, my own faith. And so the Orthodox rabbi was no liberal, I assure you. And we would talk about different stuff. But on one evening he was talking, and there was a woman in the group, and she raised her hand, and she said, "Rabbi, what's the blessing?" And I don't know what you know about rabbis, but rabbis don't usually give quick responses. If they can, they answer a question by asking a question. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar? The answer is, whose picture's on the coin? Caesar, give it to him. Next, you see, that kind of thing. And if they can't do that, they'll tell a story. So it's, anyway, like there were two men walking down the road. Anyway, the rabbi filled with his beard, which is why rabbis have beards, and I had a beard at the time. I'm going through a clean-shaven phase right now. It won't last, I assure you. I figure that as long as you're hairy on the inside, it doesn't matter if you're hairy on the outside. So I go back and forth. But the rabbi said this. He said, when God created the world, God did it in 6 days. And at the end of each day of creation, God looked at what God had made and said, this is good. This is good. So God creates the big light and the little light and dry land from the water and says it's good, and fish and cows and avocados and says they're good. And on the last day of creation, God creates the human being and does not say the human being's good. And the rabbi said, any conclusions? And someone said, people are no good. And the rabbi said, that's a possible conclusion. And that's why it's an awful translation. He said, in English, good means too many things. You have good apples, good days, good people. Buy this, it's a good buy. Good has moral overtones. Good's a funny word. He said, in Hebrew, and then he looked right over at me and said, which is what God spoke. He said, in Hebrew, God looked at what God had made and said, this is Tov, T-O-V, Tov. What does Tov mean? Tov means something is complete. Tov means something is entire. Tov means something is exactly the way it's supposed to be. It can't be any different. Water is created Tov. Fish are created Tov. The moon and the stars are created Tov. But he says, people are not created complete. People are created partial. People are created with a lot of holes. And he stopped. And then went on and said, as we travel the road of happy destiny. He didn't say that, but that's what he meant. As we're on the path, as we're on the road, as we're, as we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, anything that gets behind you and shoves you ahead on your path, anything that gets in front of you and grabs onto you and drags you ahead, anything that gets down deep inside of you and kicks and pulls and shoves and elbows until there's suddenly more room. Anything that does that is a blessing. And he said, lots of times blessings don't feel good. And lots of times you don't know they're blessings until they're long gone. And you look back on something that you knew was going to kill you. And you find out that it opened doors for you that you never even knew were there. Now that was the first time, and this was like 5 years sober, it was the first time where it made theological sense to me that alcoholism is the greatest blessing in my life. Because it found me a very fragile, frightened, numb, empty human being, and today it's better. One of the things that we say in California sometimes is keep coming back, it gets better. I don't think that's true. I think sometimes it really does get worse. Sometimes it is awful getting out of bed. Sometimes it is an act of heroism to leave your room. But what I do believe is that if you keep coming back, it does get different. And when I was drinking, nothing was ever different. It was always the same. It was 10 o'clock in the morning or 10 o'clock at night or 4th of July or Christmas. Tom was crazy and self-obsessed. Today I have some room for change in my life. So let me end by saying that when I was newly sober, I used to hear folks talk about how grateful they were to be alcoholics. And that was not true for me for a very long time. But in the San Fernando Valley, which is like going to Mars, if you're ever out there, at a meeting I heard someone say that he wasn't real grateful that he was an alcoholic, but he was just thrilled that we were. And that had that ring of truth, you know, and I could start to identify with gratitude. What a speaker is supposed to do at a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous is share experience and strength and hope. My experience and my strength and hope is this. If you go to lots of meetings, if you don't drink in between meetings, and if you don't use no dope, one day at a time, you will turn into the woman and man who is capable of working and loving and playing. Thank you.